So it looks like there's only a couple people in, so I'll just, but I'll start talking anyway. Maybe another few people will join as we go along. Okay, so this is the latest in the series of style intelligence webinars, short, focused webinars that just deal with a single topic. And some of you have been here many times before, so you know the drill. As usual, you guys who are listening to me are muted, so I cannot hear you. So if you want to ask me a question, just type in the chat box or type in the question box, whatever you have on your end, and let me know, and that will, I'll see that pop up on my screen, and I'll be able to answer any questions, and I encourage you to ask questions, of course. Today's topic is laying out a dashboard for mobile devices. If you can't see my screen for some reason, let me know. Again, type in the chat box. Let me know if there's any problems with either hearing me or seeing me. Well, not seeing me, seeing my screen. So again, the topic for anyone else who has just joined is laying out a dashboard for mobile devices. And the basic idea here is that to acknowledge the reality that people are viewing dashboards on more than just their desktop PC or laptop, but people are also viewing dashboards nowadays on phones and tablets and so on. Now, we've had a feature of scaling the dashboard to the screen size for quite some time, at least a version or two. So, so that has been in there. You have been previously able to select when you design a view sheet, when you design a dashboard, that you want to scale the dashboard to the screen, and then the dashboard will automatically scale to the device screen, whatever that size is. So that feature has been in there. However, what we've done is we've elaborated this a bit in version 12.1, and you can now specify different layouts for essentially for different devices. In other words, when you're viewing the dashboard on a laptop, you might want to display the full dashboard, which might have, let's say 8 charts and a bunch of selection elements and gauges and so on, very elaborate dashboard. If the dashboard is being viewed on a phone, you might want to trim that down a bit, right? Realizing that if somebody's viewing the dashboard on a phone, they probably cannot digest 8 charts and a whole bunch of gauges and selection elements on their little tiny phone. You're going to have to give them something simpler, right? So that's basically the idea here, is that you can create a version of a dashboard. You can take your master dashboard and create kind of versions of it that will be appropriate for devices of different sizes. That's the idea behind this. Now, before I get started, I just want to point out that this feature has actually changed in a recent build of version 12.1. So when we initially released version 12.1, the dashboard layout feature was designed one way, and then based on tester feedback and some initial customer feedback, we made some changes to it. So if you're using version 12.1 and you have your build of version 12.1 dates from, say, more than a couple weeks ago, or maybe even a week ago, then what I'm going to discuss here is a little bit different than what you'll see if you try it out on your installation of Style Intelligence. And so what you'll probably want to do if you want to take advantage of these features is make sure you get the most current build of version 12.1. Again, these features were changed. The dashboard layout feature was changed about a week ago, so that would be sometime in I guess beginning of February. Okay, so I don't know the exact date, but again, if you're looking at what I'm doing and it looks slightly different than what you see on your computer, that's the explanation. Okay, well let's get started with it. And again, for those of you who joined a little bit late, again, the rules are so that I cannot hear you speaking, so everybody is muted. So if you need to get my attention, you want to ask a question, which I encourage, please type in the chat box or type in the question box, and I'll get your question. And this is, as I always say, this is being recorded, so it'll be posted up on YouTube at probably sometime next week. Okay, let's get started. So what I have here is somewhere in the background here, I've got Visual Composer up, so hopefully everybody can see. This is Visual Composer. I have it expanded to full screen, and I've already created a dashboard to play around with here, and I called this dashboard flexible. So I'll open up this flexible dashboard. I called it that because the idea is that I want to create a version of this dashboard. I want this dashboard to be flexible to display on a whole bunch of different devices. All right, so here's the what I'll call the master dashboard. I did not take any great pains to make it beautiful. I just added a bunch of components, and as you can see, this dashboard is appropriate for viewing on a computer screen, right? It's about the right size for a dashboard. It basically fills up my screen. I have a fairly small laptop, so anything bigger than this would be a little bit a little bit tight on my screen. Of course, as I pointed out, we have had for a long time the scale to screen feature. So if you go up into the options button in your in Visual Composer, go to the options button and you go to the layout tab. At least this is where it is now. There is a scale to screen option there, right? So you can set your dashboard to always scale to the screen size, and that that kind of frees you up from having to worry about whether your dashboard might be a little bit too big for somebody's screen, a little bit too small. It will just always scale to whatever screen it's being viewed on. However, that is not, that's not the ultimate solution, because if somebody's viewing this dashboard on a phone, if this dashboard were to scale to fit the size of the phone screen, it would be virtually unusable, right? These gauges would be the text on these gauges would be so tiny that it would essentially be meaningless, and it would be very difficult for that user who's using it on a phone or even on a small tablet to see what's going on in the chart and what's going on in the table and so on. So, so that is a handy feature, scale to screen, but it has its limitations for sure. So the feature that I'm going to discuss here is creating dashboard layouts. In other words, I want to create a layout for different devices of different sizes. So the way you begin this is, again, you go up to the options button in the toolbar, right, and you go to this layout tab here. And then you'll notice the new feature is that we've got this layout panel down at the bottom. Right. So what you'll do is you'll press the new button if you want to create a new dashboard layout. In other words, a layout for a particular class of devices. And a class of devices, as we'll see, is based purely on the screen width. Right. So when I talk about a class of devices, I'm talking about not particular devices, not for example, devices made by Apple or devices made by Samsung. I'm talking about a class of devices based on screen width. So what you would do is you would press the new button here, and the first choice that you'll have is to choose whether you want to create a layout for device or for print. All right. So right now we're dealing with devices, so we'll leave the device option selected over here. Okay, leave device selected, and you can see that there are some default device classes, right? Extra small, small, medium, and large, right? So these are there by default. You'll see these if you try this out on your own installation, assuming that, again, like I said, assuming that you have the most current build of version 12.1. Again, this changed sometime in the beginning of February. So, so if you do try this out, again, on your machine and you see something other than what you're seeing on my screen, it means that you don't have the most current build. So you'll want to upgrade your upgrade to the most current build. So these are device classes. If you want to see what the class actually is, in other words, what does extra small devices actually encompass, what you can do is press the edit button. There's a little pencil button next to it over here. You press that, and then you can see that this is based, this device class is based purely on the device width. So this tells me that this class encompasses devices with a pixel width of 1 to 767 pixels. Now, these pixels are not the physical pixels of the device. These are what are called CSS pixels, right? So it's basically a logical, it's a logical pixel width that's published by the device manufacturer, right? So for any given device, what you'll want, if you're doing this, if you're creating your own device classes, which we'll see how to do in just a moment, if you're creating your own device classes, what you'll want to look for is what is the CSS pixel width of the particular device, right? And there are websites that have that listed, that list, hundreds of devices and what the CSS pixel widths are for those devices, or you can consult the manufacturer specifications and so on. So I do just want to make a note that this is not the physical pixel width of the device, it's the published CSS pixel width. So anyway, if you want to see what these default classes are, then you can just press that edit button and it will show you what the ranges are. So that was for extra small devices. For small devices, if I click the edit button there, that's 768 to 991, right? So these are, it's a set of built-in classes that basically cover the full gamut of devices. You'll note that these different classes do not overlap one another. In general, it's not useful or meaningful to have overlapping ranges, although you can define overlapping classes, but generally that will create an ambiguity if you have, for example, two classes that both encompass the same set of devices. So in other words, one class that, let's say, is 1 to 500 pixel width, and another class that's, let's say, 400 to 800 pixel width. So you've got a region, an intersection in the middle. That's generally going to create confusion, because if you choose to define layouts for both of those classes and then somebody uses a device that falls in the intersection of those two devices, so somebody uses a device that, let's say, is 500 pixel width, so that means it could fall into either of those classes, so then you don't really know what result you're going to end up with, which class is going to be used to define the layout, right? So generally, if you're defining your own classes, and again, we'll see how to do that in just a moment, you'll want to keep them so that they are mutually exclusive, right? So each device class defines a specific range of pixel widths. Okay, so let's do an example, though, just using these default classes. So what I'll do is, first of all, I'll define, I'll select extra small devices, first of all, and I'll give it a name, right? So, and I'll just use the same name. Again, I'll just call it extra small. Now you may wonder why if you're selecting the device class, why do you also have to give it a name? The reason is that you can make multiple selections here. So so I could create a layout that I want to apply both to extra small and to small devices, right? So I could select both of those, right? So that this layout then that I'm defining will include the width range specified by extra small and also the width range specified by small. And so in that case, I might want to call it, smallish devices or something like that. If I wanted to do this at a kind of a coarser level, if I just wanted to have smallish devices and largish devices, then I could make a layout named smallish devices and have that include those widths. And then I could go ahead and make a second one called largest devices and have that be medium and large devices, right? So that's the reason why I have to give it a name like that. But in this case, I'm just going to have this be, keep it simple, extra small. Okay, so I just selected extra small here, and I'm giving the name extra small. There's an option here called mobile only. In general, you probably want to leave that enabled. Basically what that does is it means that the layout that you specify, that you create for the extra small specification will only be applied if the dashboard is actually being viewed on a mobile device, right, rather than on a PC browser, right? So it means that basically, let's say somebody's viewing the dashboard on a PC browser and they make their browser really small, right? So if mobile only is selected, then that will not trigger the extra small devices layout, right? If it's being viewed on a PC, right? If you turn that off, then what might happen is if somebody is viewing the dashboard on a PC and they make their browser super narrow, then it might trigger that layout and they'll see a different dashboard layout. So in general, this is, it's reasonable to keep that enabled. The scale font option basically allows you independent control of the font. So in other words, if you create a layout and you find that in the layout that you create for the device, everything is great except that the fonts are too small. They're essentially unreadable. You can independently scale the fonts, right? So you can choose a scaling here or just type in a scaling. And this basically is just a multiplier for the font size, right? So if you find that that's the problem, that everything is great, you're viewing it on your tablet and everything's great except the fonts are way too small, you can just scale up the fonts using that option. Okay, so I've created one layout, press OK. So there's my layout called extra small, and now we'll go ahead and create a second layout. And for this one, I'll select small devices, and I'll just call this small. All right, again, leave these other settings as they are, press OK. So now I've got two layouts specified, right? Extra small layout and a small layout, right? And then I press OK. Okay, and I'm done with that part. Right, so now what happens next, right? Am I done? Not completely, right? There's still more to do. Um, because if you have sharp eyes, which is probably not really possible when you're viewing this on your end, but because the screen is probably too small. But if you look down at the bottom here in the status bar at the bottom of the Visual Composer, there's a new menu here. It's a layout menu. And so basically, if you pop open that menu, what you'll see is a list of the different layouts that you defined, right? So I just defined two layouts, one that I called extra small and one that I called small, and you'll see them both listed here, along with a layout called master, right? So hopefully it's obvious what master is. Master is the dashboard that I defined, that I created the regular way that I always create dashboards. That's the master dashboard. It has all of the components that I would want somebody to see if they were viewing this on a PC on a large screen. Right, so that's the master. So what I then have to do is I have to specify the layout, the actual components that will appear for each of the layouts that I define. So first of all, I'll go to the small layout. Right? And what you'll note is that I get a blank screen with some guidelines. Right? So basically what I have to do here is for this small layout that I defined, I have to specify which components do I want to appear in that layout and in what arrangement do I want them to appear, right? So if somebody is going to view this dashboard with a device that falls into the small class, right, and the way that I define these layouts, the small class is just identical to the default small class that was already defined, right? It was, right, so if I just go back here, back to options, right? So what I'm calling the small layout is just the small devices, and so that's a device that falls in the range 768 to 991 CSS pixel width, right? So that's what we're talking about here. So if somebody's viewing this dashboard on such a device, then what components do I want them to see in the dashboard, and what arrangement do I want them to see the components in? Right, so that's what I need to specify here. Now the line that you see here, the dotted line, is just a guide to help you lay out. It's not, this is not intended to show you the actual size of the device or anything like that. And the reason that it doesn't matter, the reason that this doesn't show you the actual device size is that when you're doing these view sheet layouts, the dashboard that you lay out will always be scaled to the device screen. Right, so these guidelines are just helpful. In fact, up at the top here, there's a guides button, and you can choose, one of a few different guidelines to help you. So in other words, if this is the basic shape of the device that you're designing for, which is, 16 to 9 portrait, right, then you can use those guidelines, and that can help you, put things in the right places. If the device that you expect people to be using this dashboard in, something like this shape, or something like this shape or that shape, right? So it's just a few different kind of rectangular shapes that people typically view that represent typical devices. And again, the intention is just to help you lay out your components. Again, regardless of how you put the components in here, they will always be scaled to the screen. So in other words, if I drag in some components, like let's say, I've got those 3 gauges, right? So obviously on the left side here, I have all of the components that exist in the master dashboard. That's what I have to work with here. So this is all the components you see here are the components that are in my original dashboard design. So if I do something like this, it doesn't matter what guidelines I select, whether I select this guideline or that guideline, right? When this is viewed on a device, it will always scale to fill the screen. So what I'm saying here is that, if I put these, gauges way up here, where'd the other one go? Somewhere down here. All right, so if I've got 3 gauges and I decide this is going to be my dashboard for, this is what I want people to see when they view the dashboard on devices of that size, right? And I stick them all up here in the top left corner, when people actually view this, these 3 gauges will all automatically scale to fill the entire screen of the device. So that's why it doesn't really matter, whether these guidelines are drawn to the actual device size or not. It's irrelevant. So when you're laying out the dashboard, the only thing that you're concerned about is basically which components you're selecting for that layout, and what is the arrangement of the components. In other words, do I want these gauges up here, or do I want them down here, right? And maybe put some charts up here, right? So it's basically the only thing that you're concerned with is the relative positions of one component to another, not the absolute positions and not the absolute sizes. Okay, well, let me begin. So I've got this dashboard. Let me throw this back into something like this kind of layout and this kind of guidelines. And what I'll do is just add some components that I think would be appropriate for a small device. All right, so I'll drop in the 2 charts. I've got, let's say, bar chart and there's my bar chart, and I'll add also the line chart. As you can see, I've given these components in the master view, I gave them meaningful names, right? So if you're wondering how did I do that, why is this one called bar chart and line chart rather than chart 1 and chart 2, right? What I did when I set up my dashboard is I perceptively went into properties, and I gave these guys meaningful names like bar chart and line chart, right? And that's obviously something that you're going to find very helpful if you're doing this kind of layout. It's good practice in any case to give components meaningful names, but certainly if you're doing, dashboard layouts like this, it would become very confusing if you just saw chart 1, chart 2, chart 3. You wouldn't know what you're dealing with because, as you can see, you don't see the actual chart. You just see a representation of the chart. So what I'll do is I'll add these 2 charts over here, kind of try to size them. And you can use alignment controls over here. So you've got align, and I could do align top and a resize max width, max height. I think I made them too big. So let me do resize min width and resize min height. Okay, so there's a couple of charts side by side, and then I'm going to add a few other things. Actually, let me switch this to, let me just think about this for a second. Yeah, I think that's fine. So I don't want to worry too much about exactly the layout that I'm doing here. So I'll add some selection components. Like below that, I'll add the range slider. Here I only had 1 range slider, so I didn't bother renaming it. It's just called range slider 1. I'll add this selection list. Again, all I'm worrying about here is the relative positioning of these components. Right? The absolute sizes, again, will be determined when the person actually views it on the device. Everything will scale uniformly to fit the screen of the device. So I'm only worrying about relative positioning here. And then I'll add down at the bottom, I'll add some gauges. It doesn't even matter if you stay in the guidelines or not, right? So if I put a component out here outside the guidelines, it will still all scale to the screen, right? So this, the thing to, I guess the takeaway here is that the guidelines are just for informational purposes, right? They don't affect anything. They're just to help you kind of visualize what you're laying out. But if I were to put this gauge out here, when the dashboard is viewed on a small device class, then it will still, everything, this gauge will appear, right? It'll just be that, you'll have kind of a big space here, but, basically all these components will scale proportionally to fit in the screen. So it will look weird, but you would see all of the components, right? You just have this, these components kind of closer together and this component further away over here, but they would all appear on the screen. So anyway, let me just finish up this design. Probably I could make the selection list bigger and whatnot. I could make the charts bigger. And these guys, of course, if I really want to be neat about it, I could, align these a bit better and distribute and stuff like that. Move these guys down. Okay, I'm going to stop futzing with this over here. Whoops, I want to do resize max. Where's it? Max height. Okay, so that's going to be my layout for this small device class, right? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to save this, right? And now this layout is saved, and so now I have a layout of the dashboard that's targeted to small devices, right? So what this means is that when somebody opens this dashboard on a device that matches that device class, and remember that the layout that I'm calling small here is just identical in this case with the default small device class, which was I already forgot. It's it's a 500 some pixels to 800 some pixels, right? So when somebody views this dashboard on such a device, they're going to see this layout, and you can preview this, right? So after you've laid out a layout for a particular class, you can go to preview, and this is basically what the person will see. Right, so if you're happy with this, then that's basically it. Then you're done, right? So somebody logs in, opens a dashboard with that device, they're going to see this dashboard. And again, the key thing here is what's different between this layout and the master layout. What's different is that I've got only a subset of components, right? So the master layout. Well, actually, what am I missing? Right, I'm missing some text elements, and I'm missing the crosstab. Right, so when somebody uses this dashboard with a small device, they're going to see only a subset of components that I've chosen to display to those people. These I guess I am considering to be the most important components on the dashboard. If somebody has a device that can't fit the whole thing, this is what I want them to see. So what I've done is I've decided what components they're going to see and in what arrangement. Right, and that's basically what a view sheet layout is, what a dashboard layout is. So let me proceed and just do the other one for my other layout, right? So now I'll switch from the menu at the bottom, I'll switch to extra small, right? So now I know that the extra small layout is based on that default extra small device class, which is basically any device from 1 pixel up to whatever it was, 500 pixels, something like that, right? So these are the smallest devices, phones, presumably. So, so for this layout, I'm going to be even more frugal with the components that I add here, and I'll just do perhaps one chart. Let me just add the bar chart, and I'll just add a selection component, or maybe a couple selection components, the range slider and the selection list. Right? Because I know here I'm designing for devices which are really quite small, and so I'm just for people who are viewing the dashboard with these devices, I'm really just giving them the bare minimum, because I know that if I overdo it here, then it's going to be it's going to be very difficult for them to use the dashboard. They'll have to zoom in and zoom out and so on and so forth. So if I want to tailor this dashboard for display on a phone, I'm going to keep it, try to keep it simple here, and that's going to be my layout for the phone. All right, for these smallest of devices. And again, I can preview it just to see, what it's going to look like. This is what somebody's going to see if they open up this dashboard on a device that falls into that smallest device class. They're going to see just one chart, one range slider, and the selection list. And again, as is always the case when you're doing these view sheet layouts, what you see here will be scaled to the screen of the device. So again, I'm not worrying about the absolute sizes, right? I'm not worrying about the fact that this chart looks, this chart is bigger than my entire phone. If I were to hold up my phone to the screen here, this chart would be bigger than it. That's not a problem, because everything is going to scale uniformly down to the size of the screen on the phone. Again, what I'm designing here is just which components are going to be present and what the relative positions of those components are. Okay, so that's a couple of examples. That's basically the whole process, right? So basically, we defined, again, just to reiterate, we went to the options button over here, went to the layout tab in view sheet options. We defined some layouts. In this simple case, I just chose layouts. I just decided to create layouts based on the default device classes, which again, right, are these 4 classes, right? So you can make a layout based on a single class or on multiple classes, a union of multiple classes, right? So you can do that. So that's the first step, is you define your layouts, which I've done here. And then for each layout, you go to this menu at the bottom of Visual Composer and you specify the components and the relative positions of those components for each layout. Right, so now I'm basically handling cases where people are viewing the dashboard on either a small device or on a very small device. In either of those two cases, again, based purely on the CSS pixel width of the device, they'll either see this version of the dashboard or this version of the dashboard. If somebody is viewing the dashboard on a device of any other pixel width, right? So let's say somebody's got a large tablet, right? I've seen some, large tablets that are almost as big as my laptop, right? So if somebody logs in, views the dashboard with a tablet that falls outside either of these ranges, outside the small or the extra small range, then what they're going to see is the master dashboard, right? So if there's no view sheet layout defined to pick up the particular device class based on the width, then what the person will see is the master, right? So that's kind of the default. If there's no special class, if there's no special layout, then they just see this, like you would see if you open the dashboard on a computer. Okay, so if somebody has a large tablet, they're going to see this. Now, if you do want to do something special for those cases, right, if you do want to have a special layout for people with large tablets, then what you would want to do is define another layout, right? So then if I say, oh, I'm not too comfortable with, those large tablet users seeing the whole thing because maybe, I don't know, maybe it's still going to be too dense. If this scales to the tablet screen, maybe it's still going to be too crowded. So then what I would want to do is go back to options, go back to new, and define another layout, maybe one for large devices or maybe one for medium devices, or I can create my own device class. Right, so let's see briefly how to do that, and it's actually very simple. Right, so if you want to create your own device classes, in other words, either to augment the existing device classes, or you could delete the existing device classes, and let's say that this is too coarse for your needs, but let's say you actually need to create, let's say, 8 different device classes based on sizes, right? You could delete these and then just create your own. Whatever the case is, the procedure is very simple. You just press the new device class button. You give it a label, so I could call it, let's say that you were going to define, 8 different device classes, so I could call this, class 1. So this would be like the smallest of devices. So I just call that class 1 device. I could give it as description like, super small, watches or something like that, right? So, if I don't know if that's future world or not, but if, somebody's viewing this dashboard on their smartwatch, or something like that. So that could be my class 1, and I could say the width there is going to be 1 pixel to, let's say, 100 pixels. I have no idea what a smartwatch is, so I'm just guessing. But again, this is CSS pixels, right? So that's going to be my class 1, and I've defined a class. I can press OK, right? And so there it is, class 1. And so now I can define layouts based on any custom classes that I've defined. Now, you might say to me, well, wait a minute, class 1 overlaps with extra small devices, right? So I've got class 1, right? That goes 1 pixel to 100 pixels, and I've got extra small devices. Whoops, I just opened the wrong one. Extra small devices goes 1 pixel to 767 pixels. So don't those overlap? Isn't that a problem? And the answer is no, it's not a problem to define them here, right? You can define overlapping classes over here. It's only a problem if you define a layout based on the overlapping classes. So let's say I were to define a layout based on class 1, right? And if I decided to call this class 1 layout, right? I'm not actually going to do this, but let's say I just decided to define a layout based on class 1, and then I go ahead and I design a second layout based on extra small devices, and I'll call that, if I could give that a name, extra small, whatever, right? So if I define those 2 different layouts, and those 2 layouts would then appear over here, right? And then if I, if I actually go ahead and assign, design the view sheet layout for those different layouts, then I have a problem, right? At that point, I have a problem. If I have 2 layouts that are overlapping in pixel dimension, right? At that point, there's a problem because now somebody, as I mentioned before, somebody opens up this dashboard on a device whose pixel width falls into both of those classes. Now it's going to be undetermined what dashboard they're actually going to see. Are they going to see the one for class 1, or are they going to see the one for extra small devices? And there's no way that you, the designer, can know that at design time, right? So that's the situation that you want to avoid. Not defining overlapping classes here, but assigning overlapping layouts, right? So you can define, you could define overlapping classes here, and then you could decide, maybe in one instance, you want to use those 8 different class sizes. In some other instance, maybe you want to use these default classes or some other set of classes, right? That's all fine. Just be aware that when you're actually defining the layouts for the particular dashboard, the layouts that you define should not be overlapping, right? There should not be intersections between those different layouts, because you want to be absolutely sure which device is going to be assigned which layout. Okay, one last thing to say about this, about doing custom classes, and that is when you specify a custom class, like I did for class 1, these classes are saved globally, right? So even though I'm doing this kind of within the context of this particular dashboard, when I define a class like this, a device class like class 1, this is saved globally. So if I now go and I open up another view sheet and I want to basically create layouts for another view sheet, another dashboard, I will see any classes that I've specified. I'll see them listed for that other view sheet as well, right? So these are saved globally and available to all view sheets, right? Which is the way that you would expect it to be, right? You don't want to have to set up classes for each view sheet that you want to lay out, right? You just want to set up the classes once and then have those accessible to all view sheets. Okay, if there's any questions on any of this, please feel free to shout them out. I think I covered most of what I wanted to say about view sheet layout for devices, so let me get on then to layout for print. Okay, again, if there's any questions about doing these view sheet layouts for devices, feel free to type me a chat or a question box and let me know. Okay, let's talk about layout for screen. Layout for print. So basically, the idea here is very similar, whereas the concept behind view sheet layout for devices is that when somebody views the dashboard on a particular device, you want to show them particular components in a particular arrangement. The concept behind print layout is the same. It's basically when somebody prints the dashboard, you want to print particular components in a particular arrangement, right? So it gives you a chance to control how the dashboard is printed. And the way that you do that is the same way, at least at this up to a point, the same way that you would do it for laying out for device, and that is that you go to the Options button in the toolbar, press that, go to the Layout tab in the View Sheet Options, and press the New button in the Layout area. Okay, and then what you do is you select Print. Right, so instead of selecting Device, you select Print. Right, and this gives you the option to specify a print layout. Now, the thing that you'll immediately notice is that unlike for devices, where you can specify you can select from different device classes and so on. For print, there's basically just one set of settings, and in fact, there's only one print layout. So I'm just going to make a slight adjustment here. Let's say I decide that for my print layout, I'm going to set a top margin of 2, right? 2 inches at the top. Right. You can also change other aspects of the page layout, and again, you have the scale font option here, so that gives you kind of global control over the font scaling. It's just a multiplier, right? So, when you test this out, if you see that all the fonts are too large or too small, you can multiply them all by this factor that you enter there. You can also set the first page number and so on. So in this case, I've just made one change, just change the top margin, press OK, right? And then I've got a print layout listed here. Right now, again, unlike layouts for devices, I cannot have multiple print layouts, right? So for devices, I can have, a whole list of different device layouts here. I could, calling them whatever names I want. For print layout, there's just one, right? So if I press the New button and I select and I try to select print here, you'll notice that I can't define a new print layout because I already have one, right? I have this print layout that I specified. If I press New, right, then print layout is no longer an option. Right? all I can do is I can modify the existing print layout or delete it, right? So if I want to modify that existing print layout, I press the edit button, and then I can modify what I did here previously, change the margins, change the the first page number and so on. But there's always going to be just one print layout. That's just a limitation. Okay, so once you've defined the print layout, then you press OK, and then the rest of it is very similar to what we did for the device layout, which is that you go down to the menu at the bottom, right? So here again, you'll notice that the label layout here is shown in red. What that means is that one of the layouts is out of sync with the master, right? So in this case, if you open up the menu, you can see that the print layout is out of sync with the master layout. That means basically that in this case, the print layout has not been assigned any components yet. However, you will also see layouts listed in red in the event that something has changed in the master. So for example, let's say that in this master, let's say I delete one of these gauges. Right now, some of the layouts that I currently have defined might use that gauge, right? So that what that means is that the layout becomes out of sync with the master. So also in that case, you'll see the layout listed in red. So whenever you see a layout, one of the layouts, print layout or device layout listed in red, it means you should probably check that layout and see if something has fallen out of sync with the master. You might need to update something. So in this case, I'm going to go to that print layout. And you can see that it looks a little bit different than the device layout. It has pages, right? So you can see I'm scrolling down. It's got different pages, and you can put components on whatever page you want. The procedure here is very similar to what we did before, and that is that you select the components that you want to be in the print layout, and you just add them to whatever page you want them to go on. So in this case, I'm going to add again the two charts. And not paying too much attention to whether things look great or not, but I'll just try to get them in there. Okay, so two charts, and then I'm going to add, I'll add the range slider below them. Right now, the thing to note, of course, is that when you print a dashboard, obviously the range slider is not going to be active, and in fact, the range slider is not going to display as a range slider. We'll just display the range that's selected, right? So when the whatever range the user has selected on the dashboard, when they choose to print the dashboard, this range slider component for print is just going to display the selected range. We'll see in a moment what that looks like. So I'll add this the range slider, and I'll just add some. I'll add some gauges. Add my gauges down here. All right, and so this is what I'm going to have on page 1 of the printed dashboard. And again, you can align these, align top, distribute. Okay, I can see that that's not going to be so great. Try that one more time. Okay, so that's what I've got on page 1, and then on page 2, I'm going to put the crosstab from the master view sheet, right, from the master layout. So I'll drag the crosstab down here, and so the crosstab will appear on page 2. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to preview this, right? Press the preview button. Right, and you'll notice that it actually it's going to open a PDF preview in my browser. Right, so it doesn't preview in Visual Composer, it previews in the browser, hopefully soon. Okay, and so this is what the print version of this dashboard is going to look like. All right, so I've got the two charts. Obviously, you would want to test this when you're designing these layouts, because if I was designing this, I'd say to myself immediately, oh boy, that really doesn't look good, and I'd try to put these in a different arrangement, maybe one on top of the other or something, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. But obviously always test things before you before you deploy for public consumption. You'll note that the range slider, as I said, it does not appear as a range slider. It just displays what the current selection is, right? So right now the current selection is, September 2014, December 2016. That's what it shows me. It shows me what the gauge settings were at the time that it was printed, and then on the second page, I've got this crosstab, and you'll note that the crosstab will expand. Right, the crosstab will expand to show all of the data. Right, so this is another instance. Both the crosstab, the table, and the range slider are instances where the print version of the dashboard will differ from the live version of the dashboard, because in the live version, so let me go back here. If we go back to the live version, right, in the live version of the dashboard, obviously the range slider looks like this. It looks like a range slider. And in the live version of the dashboard, the crosstab is restricted just to the size that I set it, right? So if I set the crosstab in my design view in the master version, if I set it to display just, what it looks like about 10 rows or 8 rows or something like that, right? That's how it's going to display. But in the print version, it's going to fully expand to display all the data, which is what you would want, because in the print version, there is no scroll bar, right? Obviously, so you don't want, when somebody prints out this dashboard, you don't want half of the table to print, and then the person thinks that that's the entirety of the data. No, you want the person, the user of the printed version to see all of the data in the table, so the table will automatically expand to show all the data. That is unless, of course, you have made selections, right? So if you make selections here, right, and then you print the dashboard, then in that case, the table will show just the selected data, which again is as you would expect. Okay, so those are the rudiments of. Let me go back to the print layout. Those are the rudiments of setting up a print layout. Again, the steps are: first go to the options button, define the print layout over here by pressing new and selecting print. Again, you can only do that once. You set the print layout, and then from the menu at the bottom, you select the print layout, and again, add the components that you want in the arrangement that you want to the pages where you want them to appear. Right, so if I preview this now, I think because I made a couple of selections there, I should only see, right, so if I look at the table now, right, I only selected a couple of categories, so I only see a couple of categories in that crosstab, right? So the crosstab will automatically expand to show all of the data that's currently selected. Now, when you're doing a print layout, there's one final twist, and then I'll stop for questions. The one final twist is that when you're doing a print layout, you have a header and a footer region that you can also add components to, right? So let me add a header and a footer, and to do this, what I do is in my print layout, I go up to the Edit Content button over here and select first Edit Header. Right, and that will give me the opportunity to add components into the header. So I can add components, existing components from the master, right? So if I have some elements in the master, for example, logos or a title text or something like that I want to add into the header here, I can drag those in, right? Just like I would drag it into the content region of the page. In this case, I don't have anything in the master that I want to add in the header, but I do want to add a logo and some text. And so there's actually a toolbox here that gives you the ability to add just into the print layout either images or text or both, right? So what I'll add here is, first of all, an image. Right, so I'm adding an image, and I'm going to have this image display the InetSoft logo. So I'll right-click the image, select Properties, and I'll try. Oh, I already have it on this server. So there's the InetSoft logo. If you don't have the image that you want on the server, you would press the Upload button and then find, that opens a file browser, find the image that you want to add, and that will upload it to the server. Press OK. I should probably scale this. Oh, actually, that's interesting. Advanced scale, right? Just so that the image fits in the box that I drew. So that's going to add an image to the header region that will appear on every page of the printed version. And then I also want to add a text element here that will display the date that the dashboard was printed. So I'll add a text element, right? And in this text element, I can enter any text, right? So I can right-click and go to Properties. And over here, I can add whatever text I want it to display. I can also format that text by right-clicking and going to format here, right? And that will allow me to format the font color, et cetera, et cetera. However, in this case, what I want to do is I want to insert the current date. So the way that I would do that is, again, open up the properties of that text element. And in the text over here, I'm going to use special codes to insert the date. So I'll say something like printed on, colon. And then I can use a special code, a D inside curly braces, like this, to insert the current date. Right. If I want to format that date, then what I would do is add a second parameter, a D in curly braces, and then followed by the formatting. So something like, let's say, a 3-letter month, and then a 2-digit day, and then a 4-digit year. Right. So this is those of you who are familiar with working in our product, you'll have seen these kinds of formats before. So I'm not going to go into the format. If you're interested in how these formats work, I'm pretty sure there's probably a video that we have, or in the documentation you can find out more about formatting. But you can use in a header or a footer, you can use these special codes, the D in curly braces and a format, to insert the current date. So that's what I'm going to have there. And let me go ahead and preview this and see what it looks like. All right, and you can see that it doesn't just preview the header, it previews the entire report. So there's the logo. And there is part of what I expected to see, but obviously I did not make that text element large enough, so I'm just going to increase the size of that text element. Put it over here, and then I'll preview it again. Okay, and so now I've got my logo at the top of each page, right? So that the header appears at the top of each page, and I've got printed on and the current date. Okay, so that's the header, and you can do the same thing for a footer, right? So if I go back over here, I can, from the button at the top, instead of edit header, I'll select edit footer, and you can put whatever text or images you want or components into the footer. So again, if I had some components in my master layout that I wanted to add into the footer of the printed layout, I could drag them in. As it turns out, in this case, I don't, so I'm not going to do that. But what I do want to add is a text element in the footer that gives me the page count. Right, so here again, you can use some special codes. If you go to properties for the text element, and I'll write over here something like page P of N. And I use P and N in curly braces, right? And that will insert the current page number and the total page number. P gives the current page, N gives the total number of pages. So this is a kind of a common thing to stick in a footer or a header. Press OK. Right, this time I'll remember to make it a little bit wider so it'll fit the text, position it how you want it, and then if you go ahead and preview again, so now I'll find I've got my header up there, I've got the body of the printed version here, down in the footer I've got my page numbering, page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2, and that's going to be my print layout. Again, if I was doing this for real, I would immediately at this point stop and find a better way to arrange those charts so that they didn't look so crowded. But I think you get the idea of basically how you approach this. And so when you have a print layout, when somebody is viewing this dashboard and they go to print it, right? So if they're if I save this dashboard and somebody's viewing this dashboard in the portal, right? So if somebody loads this up on a PC, they're going to see the master dashboard, right? Again, because I've only got those layouts defined for a couple of the smallest classes. But if somebody goes to print this, if they press the print button and go to print this dashboard, then they're going to see the print layout of this dashboard, which again includes those 2 charts and the crosstab on the second page and the range slider just displaying the currently selected range and a header and a footer. I don't think that will work in mine because I don't know if mine will load up the PDF properly. Yeah, for some reason Chrome chokes when I press the print button there. So I can't demo it here, but basically what it should look like is just like we saw here. Right, this should be the print version of the dashboard. Let me see. Let me just check one more thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop there, and let me see if there's any questions on any of that. Again, the big points to take away are that you can design a layout of a dashboard for individual devices, individual device classes, and for print. And the main technique to do that is from the options button at the top, the layout tab, and then you press new, select either device or print, and then for device you select either the device class or a group of device classes that you want to trigger that particular layout. You give the layout a name, right? And you can define a few different layouts using that technique. For print, it's the same approach, except that you select the print option here, specify the page settings, and then whether for device or for print, your next steps are to go to the menu at the bottom, select the particular layout or the particular device layout or print layout, and then decide on the components and the arrangement of those components for the device or for print. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Any questions on anything that we covered here? Um, seems like there's no questions. I'll give another moment or two. See if any questions pop up. Okay, well I guess everybody got it. Okay, so if there's no questions on any of that, then enjoy your view sheet layout adventures. Feel free to ask me questions. Again, my email, david.fass@inetsoft.com. If you have questions about it, once you start trying it out, let me know. And if there's no further questions, then I wish everybody a good weekend and hope to see you back next month for another exciting webinar. Okay, have a nice weekend, everyone. Bye.